Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. Delighted to be joining you tonight. We are on our run through the AFC North. We are starting with the Cincinnati Bengals. Where else but to start? Joe Burrow himself had a fairly incredible season, Tom. Finished as the quarterback 4 in points per game. What is there to say about Joe Burrow other than he was fantastic?
Yeah, I think he's definitely, he's built up to a point now where we can just pencil Joe Burrow in for 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns every year that he's healthy. His completion percentage and yardage, yards per attempt, all took a slight backward step from last year. But that's kind of what we expected. Last year, we were saying these kind of rates can't really carry on. These are outliers. But they've come back to a point where it's okay. We can still build this out. We've seen 2 full healthy years from him now, and we know that he's probably going to be a top 5 quarterback, even without the huge rushing workload for the next few years.
He just feels safe, reliable, plug and play. And look, I'm talking to the Stack King. He's got 2 of the best stack options out there as well. So that's always a nice little added bonus, shall we say. Talking of stacking options, let's shift over to Jamar Chase. Slight downturn this year. I think, he had a historic rookie year, but he was still pretty impressive. His ADOT's dropped. His yak per receptions dropped. His yards per route runs dropped. Are you expecting a bounce back to those rookie numbers, or do you think this is him settling into kind of a new norm?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, we might see higher seasons, but we do have to get used to the fact that the NFL's getting used to how to defend him. We saw games last year where particularly my Ravens put single man coverage on him at time, and we just know that isn't the way forward, that you are going to have to dedicate more coverage to him. And there are going to be games where you just can't get going. I think it's worth mentioning that T. Higgins and Jamar Chase both had a little bit more of a backward step this season. They had 1 week all season where both of them were top 20 wide receivers at the same time. So is there a case to be made that these 2 players are going to eat into each other's a lot? So, can T. Higgins succeed at the same time as Jamar Chase? Are we going to see both of them be able to be relevant consistently season long? And what I mean by relevant is really hitting their ceilings, hitting their ADP of where you draft them, which for Jamar Chase is going to be the first round probably, and T. Higgins is going to be no later than the 3rd round. So the players who I would be very comfortable having in best ball, but I'm going to be a little bit surprised if we don't see a little bit of pushback when it comes to redraft on the ADPs, because people will talk themselves out of it. But this offense, you want to attach yourself to players like that.
Yeah, and you hinted at T. Higgins there. As much as they did eat into each other, they both finished as top 12 wide receivers in points per game, which, let's be honest, that's where they're being drafted. That's what we want from them. I appreciate they're not having those incredible boom weeks at the same time, week in, week out through the season, but they've both been fantastic. Moving across to the running back position, we had Joe Mixon. I think, Tom, it's safe to say we disagree slightly. I think for me, we saw that shift. I think it was week 4, week 5, going from basically the Bengals only running under center to the Bengals only running from the shotgun. And I think we saw an improvement, but he was 29th out of 31 qualified running backs in yards after contact per attempt. He didn't have the incredible season. Do you think we can expect the decline is already happening? Do you think that Joe Mixon's a player to be avoiding next year?
I think it's a tricky one, and a lot will hinge on Samaje Perine. I mean, he's really earned that greater workload when Joe Mixon was out with his injury. Joe Mixon's workload went from 77% opportunity share before the injury to 59%. And part of that was because Perine really earned it. Like, he was fantastic in a couple of those games. So Perine's a free agent this offseason. If he leaves, and if the Bengals don't do an awful lot to bring in somebody behind Mixon, then you could absolutely pencil it in for another good season. The 5 touchdown game is definitely going to just bulk the stats out at some points, but he's a good running back on a good offense that's going to score a lot of touchdowns, and we just want players like that.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at the offseason ahead. So you hinted at Samaje Perine as a free agent there. They're also losing potentially Hayden Hurst in free agency. T. Higgins, 1 year remaining on his contract. He's probably the highest profile name going into the offseason. Do you think that they're going to look to get that addressed? Do you think he could potentially be a trade option?
I think if they're going to do something, they need to do something quick. We've seen time and time again that the longer you let these things go on, the more it ends up costing you in the long run, and the more difficult it'll get if Jamar Chase is starting to angle for a contract a year from now and they still haven't paid T. Higgins. That's when I'd be really worried about it. I think you can pay all of them. It's just going to require sacrifices elsewhere. And at the moment, outside of the offensive line, the Bengals they've got a good roster. So it's about being clever and working out how they can do that. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw early in the offseason they did get T. Higgins to a long-term deal because they seem to really like him as a player. And you don't want that window to close on Joe Burrow, no matter what he says about how long his window is.
Yeah, I wonder if we're going to see something where perhaps T. Higgins could sign a 2-year, 3-year contract. You could probably structure the cap hits around a Joe Burrow mega extension to get a lot of that money out the way before Jamar Chase comes available. So you're not paying them both top 12 wide receiver salaries. But I personally think T. Higgins is going to remain a Bengal. I don't think, as some people are suggesting, we're going to see a move.
I think if we do see T. Higgins signed to a longer-term deal, it's probably at the expense of Tyler Boyd. You know, you're going to need to move him on and bring in a younger draft pick, somebody who's probably cheaper. And Tyler Boyd seems to be on the downhill slope now. He had 10 games outside the top 30 this year, 7 games of single-digit points. So perhaps it's time that they just shuffle the deck slightly and use that money to be able to pay T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think it's perfect you hint that. I've got 2 potential cuts that we could see this offseason. I think Tyler Boyd, he's got 0 dead cap hit left. He's only got 1 year remaining on the contract. As you said, it almost makes too much sense to kind of move on from someone like that. But perhaps the guy that's not being talked about as a potential cut candidate, we got Joe Mixon. He's only got 2 years remaining on that contract. There's very little dead cap hit. They can move on from him for basically free. Could we see them, maybe spending a day 2 draft pick to go and get a running back in what is a loaded class, replace Joe Mixon, and then that frees up that money to spend on those 2 stud receivers and Joe Burrow? Because, as much as the salary cap's a myth, it's all got to be jiggled around somehow.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes a lot of sense. I think it's just that kind of question mark of if we get rid of Joe Mixon, what does it do to the offense? This year, he had 69 targets in 13 games, which was by far a career high for him. So if you're bringing in a rookie, is that somebody you're going to be able to trust in pass protection? Is that somebody you're going to be able to trust in the passing game as well as the running game? And if not, you're going to need 2 running backs to solve the issue. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do there. I mean, they in DVOA this year, they were the 6th best team across the league with their rushing game. So it's not like they really want to do too much to upset the apple cart.